precise at the moment when you said that there is an opportunity to make minor amendments? How would that take?
It doesn't actually exist at the CRD yet. There is provincial legislation that's been in place for 3 or 4 years now, or 3 years now, I think, that establishes a process where you can make minor amendments. You have to go through a process in your regional district of deciding what you will determine to be major and minor, and then you establish within provincial legislation a process for how you would handle minor amendments. The major amendments would stay the same. You know, there is the existing provincial structure that I sort of described a little bit. Minor amendments, we don't have that process yet. But it's something that we intend to have in the next RSS. Now, the one other thing I should have mentioned was the regional context statements. One of the problems we had last time around was we just let everybody go out and do their own regional context statement. And that's how you say how your official community plan will be consistent with the regional growth strategy. Some of them were very precise, very well defined, very prescriptive. This is what we will do. Some of them were kind of broad, general terms. We realized that this time around we need to have a common form for all of them. And it has to be clearly defined. Because if it isn't, it becomes hard to enforce. We like apple pie and motherhood. Oh, okay. How are we going to decide whether that's consistent with apple pie and motherhood? So we need to make sure this time around those context statements are very specifically written and have a common theme through various municipalities. Yeah?
Hi, I just have a quick question.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh, sorry. Let me know if I'm correct in my understanding. Right now, if a municipality would like to make their urban containment boundaries larger, it requires a unanimous vote by the CRD. However, I'm under the understanding that there's some talk about changing that so it's becoming a 50% plus one vote to allow municipalities to do such a thing. Is that right?
Well, that would again fit under the minor and major amendment. Now, again, that would be a definition of how you're doing. In Saanich, for example, the Blenkinsop Valley is outside our urban containment boundary, so it's meant to stay essentially rural. If we were to try to put the whole Blenkinsop Valley into our urban area, that would, without question, be considered to be a major amendment. If we got a little kink that we can straighten out by putting in 2 houses, that probably would be a minor amendment. Right now, and under the new strategy, we will probably have a process for major and minor amendments. It makes sense. The critical thing will be how we define minor. And if somebody's looking at moving their boundary by 1 kilometer, probably that's not minor. Sure.
Is it possible to get people to come to the mic? Because I don't think most of us are hearing.
Sure. The question was basically, and I think it's a good idea if people didn't mind coming to this floor mic, it's probably helpful. But the question was essentially, rather than having a population estimate of what we expect the population to grow to, maybe we should have a population target, a population limit that's saying this is as far as we think we can grow and remain sustainable within this region. When you ask that question, you're really talking about the relative that we don't like to speak about, that we keep hidden in the closet. Drinks too much, or whatever. Right? Names them, but no, just kidding. They didn't know that about yourself? No. Anyhow, no, I agree, you know, I mean, certainly we need to start to talk about that on a global scale as well as a local scale. It's been one that, you know, we've based our society around the process of continual growth. And that's something that is problematic at a certain time. But right now, it isn't something that the majority of politicians, by any stretch of the of imagination have been willing to countenance. So you work with the possible. So if they are willing to look at a strategy that starts to at least put whatever growth you have in the right places, in the right form, eventually you may get them to what you're talking about, which is a good thing. Now, in terms of the lack of sidewalks and so forth, the more your growth is spread out, the more expensive your infrastructure is, by a long way. And it becomes very expensive to put in the kind of amenities. You know, that's why in rural centers we don't have a lot of amenities, because it's really expensive to do it. You know, you put in a sidewalk for, you know, so many people per hectare versus 20 times as many in an urban area. And by the way, when you do sprawl, by the way, one of the, I just want to mention this, people look and they say, well, you know, it's a good thing that we're having more housing out in the western communities because it's cheaper. And it is cheaper to buy a house. You know, some places it's cheaper to buy a house in Souk than it is in Victoria. But you have to understand that that's subsidized housing. We maybe don't have a direct subsidy where we say we're going to give a person this much for housing, but all the infrastructure we put out there isn't paid for by the people of Souk. It's paid for by the people of the rest of the region. We accepted Souk way back at some point as being part of the water district. We, not very long ago, had to replace the water line out to Souk because the old one wasn't viable anymore. It cost over $30 million. There is no way in 100 years that the people of Souk can afford to pay for that. So fundamentally, the rest of the people of the region are paying for it. If we have to put an LRT out to Langford, it costs $500 million. People in Langford aren't even close to large enough in numbers to pay their share, to pay for the local share. So the people of Victoria and Saanich and Oak Bay and Esquimalt View Royal, where the bulk of people are, they'll be paying for it. So you're subsidizing that housing. Now, you can decide that's a good thing if you want. But if you think it's, oh, it's just cheaper. No, 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 no. You pay for it in other ways. And it's subsidized.
And development does not pay for it, which is a misnomer.
Exactly. Had you?
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Derman.
Good to
I
see
think you
you.
brought a lot of old memories back to me. It was 1968.
Good ones, we hope.
Well, they were most of. It was 1968 when a friend of mine and I came from UBC. He did the planning and I did the engineering, and we were roommates in the dormitories, and we also lived together for a year.
Now,
He used to work
you-
for Saanich.
You're trying to tell me we can blame it all on you?
A bit of it. At that time, I think this urban containment boundary issue was going on. It was just being completed at that time. And he did, in fact, told me that Lincolnshire Valley was going to be outside the containment boundary and would be preserved. So that was, and
good.
Tom Loney was the planner at that time. And my first run with the politicians was Mr. Hugh Curtis. And I had to visit into his office. But thank you so much. I think you brought a lot of old memories back here. The question I have is how Agricultural Land Commission is dovetailed into the regional growth strategy. Do they at all consider, when the applications go to them, do they consider regional growth strategy, or do they overlook at it?
There is not a direct connection between the two. However, what happens is that when we are required in the regional growth strategy to consider the agricultural viability of the region, and there is a provincial imperative, as I've read out, to protect the agricultural land base. So that is a requisite of the strategy. It is supposed to be covered by the urban containment boundaries that we create. The strategy really centers around what's called the RUXPA, which is the system of urban containment boundaries around the region. As in the case of Langford, it's their whole municipality. So, you know, somewhat questionable how effective it is. Central Saanich, I thought in their last go-around, had really quite a good set of urban containment boundaries. I understand there may be some pressures to change that, but I think it's really been quite good. There's not,
There's
We
no
don't
direct-
send the RGS to the Agricultural Land Commission for their acceptance or anything of that nature, no.
So that task is performed by the council members?
Yeah.
When they send the recommendation?
No, yeah, exactly.
Without support or with no
It
recommendation?
is, but it's also covered in a way by the RGS in that generally most of the agricultural land is outside the urban containment boundary. So if somebody was planning and, hey, I've got this great, wonderful condominium, I'm going to put it out in your farmland. If that's agricultural land reserve or outside the urban containment boundary, it might require an amendment.
Yeah, thank you.
Hadji did, by the way, the current Agricultural Land Commission is much better than it was a few years ago. It's very strict. And I just do want to mention one thing before the last question. Hadji mentioned the Saanich Urban Containment Boundary. And that shows, I think, the value of long-range visionary planning. Those guys put in that urban containment boundary in 1968 and expected it to guide the future of Saanich for the next 50 years. Only lasted about 35 or 40, but just the same. It resulted in a more compact land use form. And, you know, I've had it happen to me when I go around campaigning, election time and knock, on somebody's door, hello. and you get a lot of people, oh, I really like the way Saanich is. I want to thank you for the job you're doing. And my answer has to be, well, yeah, I appreciate that, but don't thank me, because I'm not the one who did it. Thank Hugh Curtis and the councils of the past who had the vision to say, what do we need to become and what do we want to become? And they set it up. We need to do the same thing today. And the RGS is our way of doing it. Yes, sir.
Hi, Vic. My name is
Hi.
Jack Waters.
Hi, Jack.
A local resident here. First, thank you very much for giving up your evening to come out and speak with us.
Our pleasure.
Your words are very much appreciated. Where can I start? Your last remarks were very, very pertinent to what I have to ask, and that is the OCP, Regional Growth Strategies. Our council of 4 years ago threw this all down the toilet and allowed for a massive development up on the boundary between North Saanich and Central Saanich. Some of the local citizens are members of a group who felt that this was against the OCP and against the Regional Growth Strategy and took the municipality to task, and at very great cost to themselves personally. We didn't get much support and ended up with a huge legal bill which has cost some of us in excess of $100,000. Now, I guess my question has to be, what defense do the citizens of a community have when a municipality decides to pat a friend on the back and give them this wonderful financial benefit by passing bylaws that are in excess and well beyond the OCP and the Regional Growth Strategy?
Well, I can't comment on a specific development because that's something that's in the authority of Central Saanich. One of the issues that came to the fore last time around was that, by the way, and I think Central Saanich's official community plan as it was put into the RGS, I thought was very good. But the context statement was not very specific. And it was quite general in nature and open to interpretation. That made, and that's one of the reasons why we recognize the fact that we have to have the context statements much more specific and prescriptive and much clearly define what will be done and what won't be done. So that, I think that situation wound up in the courts, did it not?
It did.
It did.
Supreme
And,
Court.
yeah, and at that point, I think essentially that was what the judge ruled, that in fact the context statement didn't define whether or not this was something that fit in. There was an agricultural zone, I think, created for over
He's on the border of
Oh,
Senate.
in the in the
Senate.
Island View area?
Yeah.
In the Island View area, and I believe that was the zoning that was used, again, in this development. And some would argue, I think, with cause, that that didn't fit. But the courts felt there was not enough specificity either in the context statement. At the regional level, all we can decide is whether or not something that is done in an OCP is in violation of the context statement. In this case, the context statement that had been accepted was general enough that the majority on the CRD board felt, and staff, that we couldn't make the case, as the courts, I guess, eventually ruled, that it was inconsistent. So the only powers that the regional district has is to say they believe it is inconsistent. And if you get an opinion from your staff, and they're probably correct, that the context statement you accepted was not well defined, then you're in trouble. So this time around, we will try, staff knows, and we'll see how we do, but we do need to make those context statements much more specific. Unfortunately for citizens, as you say, you go to court and there are costs, and the only other thing that is available to the citizens is the next election. And sometimes that's too late. It's the fact that, you know, you didn't shoot one of the gunslingers. Yeah, and that's the way of it. Now, you know, and please don't get me wrong, developers are absolutely critical in our society. They fulfill a very useful function. The point is, developers should not be planning our communities. We should be planning, telling the developers what we want, and then they should fill it in.
We do that with the OCP.
Yeah, but, you know, the link, unfortunately for you in that case, the link of your OCP to the RGS is the context statement, and the link was not a good one.
Sharon Lawrence.
Hi, Sharon.
I wanted to know, well, first of all, if the regional district board, whatever it is, decided that people should only have a bath once a week, then you could control water and you could control urban sprawl, you can control it all, can't you? And I don't even know where our water really comes from and how much there is there for, you know, expanding. But that's just leading into this other thing. I want to know how, I think BC assessment is a culprit in all of this, because I sit on a small bit of, almost 5 acres, 40 years there, kept all my trees. When they fall, they rot, they produce. I have no sun, I have mostly shade, and I like it that way. No sidewalk, no lights, you know, street lighting, no water. But the BC assessment has made it such that my little $80,000 house, compared to they claim 600 or I think it's 600,000 or 700,000 for the land, makes it impossible to pay $4,000 for taxes. Now, BC assessment should be, I think, allowing me to say I am helping in this green thing of having better air, saving water, etc., because I've got all the trees. But if I chop the trees down and raise chickens, then, you know, I could call it a farm and then my taxes go down.
Yeah, first of all, BC assessment, of course, is set up as an independent authority.
But it's a realty thing.
Yeah, while they're an independent authority whose job is supposedly to try to fairly assess various properties, have there been some problems? Absolutely. They went through an issue a while back, not 3 or 4, about 5 years ago now, I guess, where they were trying to reassess farmland, and people didn't qualify to be farms, and people who had met the minimum requirements in terms of what they produced cash-wise were reassessed all of a sudden. I had a huge number of phone calls, and I mean the process was bizarrely bad. One person had a bunch of honeybees on their property, quite a large group of hives, and that was part of their farm production. BC assessment was trying to say that the only part of their property that qualified as farms was the 4 square feet under each hive. Beg your pardon? Do you think the bees sit in there and manufacture honey? But, you know, that kind of thing. But they are independent. You as a property owner can appeal to them. The other thing that can happen is your council, under the legislation now, can decide if they will give you a permissive exemption. We have a lady on Prospect Lake who decided she would keep some property in a natural state. And we give her something of a permissive exemption. And it has to be within provincial legislation. But it reduces her taxes somewhat in return for preserving that property. We haven't done that broadly. I agree with you. There should be a recognition of the value somebody is by contributing ecologically. And that's possible under provincial legislation, but hasn't been done a lot yet.
Thank you.
Good evening, Vic.
My name.
Bruce Lemire Elmore from Otter Point, actually,
Hi, Bruce.
but very interested in the work you do and pleased to see your concern for the greater common good and the regional sustainability and growth strategies that have come out of that. As we've moved over the last 30 years from a continual growth mentality to a managed growth mentality, or a planned growth mentality, the process within the CRD has been mainly through zoning and changing of zoning as new community plans come out, where in the rural areas, development, the right to development is taken away because the zoning that allowed it is changed. And in the urban areas, the right to develop is increased because the zoning there is increased. As that happens, there's an essential inequity because the rural owner has now lost potential value and the urban owner has had just a free bonus because of the legal change in the zoning. The King County has transfer of development rights process that offsets that, so that when the urban developer wants to develop, he has to buy development rights from the people who lost them. Has the CRD looked at that and tried to figure out how they can offset the essential inequity of changing zoning by dictate to changing it by market principles so that the cash moves the opposite way of the zoning rights? It seems, well, I'm involved with a family company, a tree farm company in Seattle it's been in the Pacific Northwest since, well, 1850. And we've used a lot of development rights, both buying them and selling them, and you doing three-party deals with a lot of land conservancy to enable the saving of forest area where people wanted it saved, and then moving those development rights to a development area and then developing there. So that those who lose their ability to develop, and it's more a mental sense that they had with continual growth possibility, and then suddenly this gets changed and they just feel money's been taken out of their pockets. Has the CRD looked at that? Is it feasible here? I've been told, no, you can't because we don't have development rights in Canada. Well, I think we do.
Yeah.
So can you address that?
Sure.
Thank you.
First, the general answer, somewhat they have looked at that. But one of the problems you're dealing with is the area where you are is managed in terms of planning function by the CRD because it is not presently incorporated as a municipality. So the CRD has control of zoning there. CRD has no control over zoning in the urban areas at all. They have the regional growth strategy where they can get people to set urban containment boundaries, but inside that urban containment boundary, they have no control over the zoning. They can encourage people, we would like you to put more density here, but on the last RGS, regional growth strategy, there were 8, I guess, major centers identified. One in the western communities in the Langford area, one downtown Victoria, Sydney area, and the rest were primarily in Saanich, or Victoria-Saanich border. Douglas corridor, we should be really moving on that. CRD would like to see us move on it. We haven't done the planning for it, we haven't moved the way we should, in my view. But that's a municipal control. So the CRD can control your area, but they can't control the urban areas. Now, in terms of transfer of value, yeah, that's possible if people wanted to address that issue, you know, under their regional government. In the area of Minneapolis-St. Paul, you know, we think we have an issue with 13 municipalities. How many do you think there are in Minneapolis-St. Paul? Any guesses?
100.
165.
Oh.
All of whom have planning authority. Every one of them, land use planning authority. So they got to, and they had a state that didn't really want to push metro, you know, regional government. So they got together and they formed their own because they recognized they had to do it. And they recognized what you're talking about, the fact that there were some areas they wanted to keep green and some areas where they thought density should go. And they actually set up a function where the municipalities that get to densify share some of their tax revenues with the municipalities that are preserving the green areas. So that can be done. Whether there is a will in this area to do it, it's something that I would look at and think, you know, but you know, right now we've got the fiefdoms, and we're all, in our view, short of tax money. And you know, I think, you know, it's like, you know, in terms of preservation of agricultural land. Right now, you know, agricultural land is not as viable in this area as we would like it to be. What we're really asking for is an insurance policy, that we keep that agricultural land in case we really need it in the future. Well, generally you pay for insurance policies. I think we should, but I think I'm in a minority right now.
Harry, do you want a quick one? Because I saw you first.
Thank you. I'll speak up so people can hear me. Vic, thanks very much for your
My pleasure.
presentation. I have a question, but just a couple of comments on points that have been raised earlier about the assessment authority. You know, the Islands Trust is an interesting example here. It's electoral areas like the Juan de Fuca areas. They're not incorporated, but in using some of these tools. So the Islands Trust is the only area in British Columbia that has something called a Natural Area Protection Tax Exemption Program, NAPTEP. And so if you put a conservation covenant on your land, and that's held by the Islands Trust Fund, which is kind of their, it's kind of their government conservation conservancy entity. So if that trust fund holds a covenant on your land, you can get up to a 65% property exemption, but it's the only place in British Columbia where that applies. So that is something that may be of interest to the CRD. You'd have to get provincial approval.
Yep.
And in terms of transfer development potential, you said you think it's possible. I totally agree. On Salt Spring, it's not common, but it is possible for local governments to transfer. And so the way it happens on Salt Spring is that if there's a sending area and a receiving area, with the sending area being the rural green space that you want to protect. And so under the bylaws on Salt Spring, if you put a conservation covenant on say a chunk of land, and then it can essentially send its densities to an area closer to the village, and that's a rezoning kind of at both ends, but there has to be a conservation covenant protecting the green space, and there's a deal done between the property owners. So it is quite possible within a local government to do that kind of thing. Sorry to go on, but the question I had for you, it was an interesting statement you made about this next iteration of the regional growth strategy, and I thought you said if the CRD board can't agree on a new strategy, then the existing strategy stays in place. I don't know if I got that right. So what I'm interested in is, what's the voting rule on that? Does that have to be unanimous? if there's not unanimity at the regional district board about each of the individual municipalities bringing changes to the regional, does that agreement have to be unanimous?
Essentially, yes. Yeah, that's why last time around, it took Carol would know better than me on that one. It took a long, long time to put in place because
6 years.
Sydney had a number of issues, and it took quite a while to get Sydney in place. You know, there were a lot of compromises with Langford. Souk had concerns and so forth. So basically, if it's not unanimous at a certain time, it can go to arbitration. But, you know, it's a long, difficult process. But you're right, and Gary's, of course, from the islands, as you know, and here now too. But the Islands Trust, of course, is unique in that the islands are part of the regional district, but they have their own separate governance structure. Not to say that we couldn't do it at CRD if there is a will. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Frances Pugh,
Hi,
and
Frances.
yeah, resident of Central Saanich. Basically, I think what we're talking about, the gentleman from Otter Point and everything are density transfers. And that's something that is happening on Denman and on Salt Spring. Though the mechanism is in place to do that. So if you are protecting a vital property in Victoria that you want to keep low densities on, you could, with the right mechanisms in place, you can transfer those densities to a developer so that he could, instead of building a 4-story building, build a 5-story building. Say he purchased 5 densities from that property. So it's yeah, it's a very interesting mechanism if you don't want to sprawl. If in Saanich you have a property that possibly could be 6 lots, and you wanted to transfer the densities and just keep it as one large property, then you could take those densities and transfer them to another area in Saanich where perhaps 5 lots might be appropriate, or another, or one more level of an apartment or something like that. So it's density transfers. and unfortunately, Victoria, Saanich, we haven't gone there yet.
Well, no, in terms of, there has been density bonusing, where a developer has been given more density in return for certain amenities, provision, and so forth. In terms of the other...
But that doesn't actually protect the property.
No, it doesn't, but in terms of the other one, you'd have to see the circumstance of what it was, because in a lot of cases in urban Saanich, it's already fairly built out. And council, has granted certain zoning, and that zoning has taken care of. So in many places, they don't have the right to any more density than they already have. There are some properties in Saanich that are subdividable, that are, for example, very large lots that somehow or other got zoned RS6.
Yeah.
And yet they're the size of RS12. They're much bigger lots. By the way, once council zones something, it goes out of council's authority and passes to staff, who carries out the subdivision, and council is not permitted to interfere with that.
Okay.
Now, if on those kinds of properties, if council wished to preserve it as a large lot without changing the zoning, council could go in and just say, no, it's in the public interest to change your zoning from RS6 to RS12. You could take council to court, and if courts decided that it was in the public interest, then council could do it.
That hasn't worked well.
The council could do it. But other than that, you'd have to look at what properties, because in most cases, the properties don't have a right to extra zoning.
And the mechanism isn't in place to even look at it, really.
Well, the provincial legislation is there, but
Okay.
there's no mechanism in Saanich, Victoria, I'm aware of.
Yeah.
It's been more commonly
Because-
used to compensate people for preserving urban and rural areas.
Yeah,
Now,
and they've done it on Salt Spring and Denman,
Yeah.
but it's not available on municipalities.
Yeah. Not that I am aware of.
Yeah, okay.
Vic, I wanted to take this opportunity to come up here and publicly thank you for being what I think is a moral conscience at the CRD table.
Sorry. Sorry about the drinking problem.
We won't tell these stories. At any rate, I also wanted to say one of the things I liked about your speech was the discussion about engaging with residents, getting them familiar with the regional growth strategy, regional sustainability strategy, and I wanted to ask you if you had ideas about how we might do that to increase the awareness.
Yeah, it's it's not Friday night football game, so it's sometimes a little bit hard to draw people in. I really think the best tools are the thing. I think there has to be a multifaceted program. I think the really best tools are things like the MetroQuest I was describing, where you can load it up on your home computer, and you can turn it in. Wow, that's what happens to my region. Is that really what I want to see happen? And if you combine that with major spreads in the newspapers, in these day and age, there ought to be ways to do it on the internet.
You and I, you like cycling. I like cycling.
Yeah.
What about public maps at cycling points or areas which show where the urban containment boundary is and explain what it is and why it's important?
I think you need to go beyond that. I think you have to create situations where people can see scenarios, where they can see if we make these choices, these are the consequences. That's what I think you need to do. There should be lots of ways we could do that on the internet, and we should do it. Or there should be YouTubes on it. There should be all sorts of things. But right now, it's been way too much in-house. And in-house means that it's fragile because it doesn't have that big mass of public support. Zeb, just wondered what was in that cup.
I'm going to entertain one or two more questions. You come on over here after, please. Talking about football, apparently the Lions are playing tonight, Vic, so we don't want to get home for the fourth quarter.
Oh, no, I'm PVR yet, so.
Larry Lehman, I just walk up
Hi,
here. I guess one of my questions is to you is that I know that previous council before, there was a number of issues that came up, and there was a number of councillors that, and this goes to your public education, people know how things works. The CRD was painted as a big brother, paternal, trying to ram stuff down our throat, tell us what we can do and what we can't do. And I think a fairly large number of the electorate thought, well, yeah, this is our place, we should be able to make our own decisions. But when you try to articulate to those people that these are our decisions, these are decisions that we have made as a community, and what it is, it's like, it's like the child and the parent, they make an agreement, but of course the kid forgets about it when he wants the extra piece of pie or whatever, and paints the parent as an ogre. So I guess what happens in meetings sometimes I've been to, the public has an ability to come up and speak, and everybody sort of has their input, but I haven't seen anybody from the CRD there, or making any comment on things that are maybe in progress. So I guess my question to you is there any facility, is there any appetite, is there any mechanism whereby the CRD monitors what goes on in the municipalities to a degree without being too big brotherish, but is able to make any type of input into certain issues that come up by making the public aware, specifically different things that, say in Central Saanich, they agreed, or it's on the books what they will do, and what they are looking at is not dictated by the CRD, but is dictated by their own policies, as you say, that are part and parcel of it. And I think to try and get the education out of the people in such a way that, in a way that's timely, I guess, to deal with those issues, I think that we can close the barn door a whole lot quicker before everybody's flat out got hit by a truck.
It's convenient for people to make the CRD the whipping boy
Yes.
when they want a change. But you're absolutely right. You know, those RGS agreements and context statements weren't done overnight. They were the result of very, very hard negotiations over time and working municipalities, you know, with each other and with the CRD. And then they became what everybody agreed to. It became like a legal contract.
Yes.
You know, and you don't get to sign that legal contract and 2 days later say, oh, I've changed my mind. You know, but the CRD now does some monitoring. It certainly monitors the area it administers out in the Juanafuca area.
I know they're very involved.
And we put in a protocol that isn't perfect, but what it means is any director can now bring any issue in any municipality before the CRD to get a staff report on whether or not it's consistent. So if somebody in this municipality or any other, and I don't want to interfere with another municipality's business, but if it's a regional issue, and it's important as a regional director, could bring something to me, and if I thought there was validity to it, I could take it to the CRD and say, I want to report on this. You know, and then the staff would report, and CRD, the board would vote. There is on my website, I did an interview about 3 years ago on Channel 11 television about the process in Central Saanich and the RGS and the process in the Juanafuca area. And it's still at vicderman.com, and it's still there. Please feel free to look at it or download it or take it or whatever you want.
Thank you. I guess one more brief question.
Sure.
The municipalities, are there not certain councillors, whether it be the mayor or councillor, that are assigned or, I guess for lack of a better word, that does liaison with the CRD, or the CRD is not made up of representatives from the various municipalities?
The CRD is composed of, the CRD board is composed of directors from all the participating municipalities. It's by population.
Yes.
So for every 25,000 or part thereof, you get a director. So Saanich, which is around 116,000 right now, has 5 directors.
And Central Saanich has?
Central Saanich has 1, because you're under 25,000, and that's the mayor. Generally, municipalities send their mayor, not all do. Langford had, for a long time, only 1, and they sent Denise Blackwell, who's a councillor. Their mayor decided he wasn't going to participate.
He had conflict of interest.
He may have had
He does business with the
he may have had a conflict. They've now grown to just over 25,000, so they now have 2 directors. The only ones who have multiple directors are Saanich, which has 5, City of Victoria has 4, and Langford has 2.
Okay, now as a member from Central Saanich who sits in the CRD, are they not under any obligation when an issue is arising that may be in conflict with that? Do they not at least have the directive to lay out and explain what the policy is based on the municipality's long-term planning and the rules and the regulations and the things that they agreed to?
Now, you could argue that there's a moral responsibility to do that, but there's no legal responsibility.
Okay, so there's no directive from the CRD?
No.
That when they're in council, they got the council hat and they don't have these 2 hats, they can't?
No, my view is when you walk into the CRD, you are a regional director first and a municipal councillor second. I'm not so sure that's always the case.
Thank you.
Maybe explain, Vic, that Saanich actually votes for their CRD directors, unlike most of the municipalities.
Well, actually Victoria does now too.
Does it too?
Yeah,
Okay.
they follow our model. There is no provincial legislation that allows you to vote for regional directors.
But we decided.
So what we decided to do is to have a straw poll. And when there's a municipal election, you get to vote for who you want to be on council, and you get to vote for who you would like to send to the CRD. We are not legally obliged to follow that vote, but we have taken the view that we are morally obliged to do it, and so the top finishers get to go to the CRD. And so in that way, Saanich's CRD representatives are elected, and so are the City of Victoria at this point. They started last election.
That came about after 1996 election.
About
came in
1980.
after a real schmozzle.
Well, there was tended to be a bit of an old boys club.
Yeah.
Let's send our friends, and that's not the best way to do it. Well, yeah, here.
Okay, last question or two. I'm not gonna have any more after, maybe one more after Alicia. Thanks.
First of all, I wanted to say thank you to the Farmlands Trust for hosting
Absolutely.
tonight.
Absolutely.
And I think the link to preserving farmland in light of the pressures of sprawl. I have two questions. One is whether you can give us a bit of an update around the food strategy that is going to form part of the regional sustainability plan and what we can do to help further that. My other question is, I'm encouraged, as you said, in the province, looking at climate change and looking at this in a much broader context. I think it's critical that we start doing that. And my question is as additional criteria is being given to the regional district level to incorporate, climate change and other factors, can we not push back to the provincial government for greater resources? Because I think, like as you said, not all council members appreciate the urgency around climate change and the need to do urban planning in light of that. Can we not find resources or put pressure on the province to help with the education?
The issue of the balanced budget, I guess, or supposedly the balanced budget. Yeah, it would be lovely if they did. Given the provincial financial situation right now, I think it is unlikely that they would give much. But I mean, unfortunately, we kind of were leaders in climate change response to a fair degree in North America a few years back, and now it's sort of drifted off the table. Province isn't. The regional growth strategy legislation was created by the last NDP government. The current government goes along with it. I'm not so sure how huge a fan they are of it, and the support has been not really readily forthcoming at the present time.
So, okay, thank you. Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Vic.
Thank you very much, Ed. Thank you very, very much. Just two things. If anybody is interested in an overview of the regional growth strategy legislation, not the legislation itself, there's a very good overview on the CRD website. It's, will go through all of the main things and does a pretty good job of it. And the last thing, if I can be self-serving, I have a presentation called The Natural City that looks broadly at urban sustainability. If anybody's interested, I'd love to do a presentation sometime in Central Saanich.
Great.
Thank you very much.